I made my best Elder Scrolls. Like, I'm happy with that. I don't want to do another one. And I've spent 10 years doing Fallout games, so someone else can do that. I've spent 10 years thinking about nukes and live right next to Washington, D.C. That's probably not healthy.
This is Nate Purkeypile. You may remember him from our documentary on Bethesda Game Studios, or our pre-release feature on Fallout 76. More on that later. Well, partway through Starfield's development, Nate decided to leave the studio where he had helped create some of the most celebrated and commercially successful open world games of all time. From Fallout 3 to Skyrim and Fallout 4, Nate created many of those world's most iconic areas, and as art lead for Fallout 76, he is partly responsible for arguably the best part of that game at launch, its map. Nate was working on an earlier version of Starfield's Neon when he left the studio he'd called home for 14 years, and since then he's been documenting his new design adventure on both YouTube and TikTok. His new project is an open-world hunting game, a combination of his love of heavy metal and a childhood raised in the woods of southern Oregon. The game is called The Axis Unseen, and remarkably, he's making it all by himself. So when I was back in my old stomping ground of Maryland for a wedding during the summer, I grabbed my camera and went to check in on Nate. Not just to see how he's doing post-Bethesda, but how the game was coming along, what it's like moving from the creation engine to Unreal, the pros and cons of being a solo indie dev, and just how bad the reception to Fallout 76 felt to those who'd been working on it.
So I'm working on The Axis Unseen, which is a heavy metal horror game where you hunt monsters from folklore. And I'm doing it all by myself now. Like, it is a heavy metal game, so I wanted to reflect that aesthetic and have something that was like really epic. And there's like the giant redwoods and huge skull sculptures. That mountain that you see is like literally 2 miles tall. But I also really wanted it to play well and not just look like, hey, here's this Unreal 5 game number 5000. So that's why I chose to stylize it. And I actually have almost no textures in the game. Like, it's literally flat colors. But because it is that nanite geometry, like, there's still a lot of detail there. Every little tiny piece of dirt.
Oh my
can
gosh.
cast shadows, which is
Oh my god.
wild.
That's the nanite stuff?
Yeah, because it's like they call it virtual shadow maps, and basically what it does is like, those are your shadows. You can see like all the tiny little bits there, and it breaks it into all these little chunks, which get even smaller. So you can see close up, like each one of those, like that's why it's higher detailed. Because normally you would have it, they would call it cascaded shadow maps, where it'd be like all the shadows out to here are one level and then out to there. But that never let you get fine detail without like weird little tricks, like screen space shadows and stuff. But in this case, since they're adjusting it on the fly, that's what lets you have those absurdly detailed little dirt shadows, which is not a thing. And you can see what nanite is doing too. Because ultimately, it makes sense when you think about it. What they're trying to do is render on average like 1 triangle per pixel.
Right.
You don't actually need more than that. So they just clustered the data like that. And it kind of goes back to like that tech they had on Rage, like the mega texture, but with geometry. That also, weirdly enough, lets me make the game faster. Which you wouldn't think. You'd be like, oh, it's like more detailed and stuff. But actually, normally when you're making a game, you have that really high detailed stuff. Then you have to do the low poly version and bake it out and unwrap your model and do all these things to get the game version. But I can just make stuff, and like I use this VR headset here to sculpt things, and I can, like this crazy sculpture that shows up in the game, I did that in like 40 minutes before dinner one day, and I just shove it straight into the game with all that detail. So that sounds great. Yeah, so this is the camper trailer, and sometimes we go out on these camping trips and stuff, and I work out of this thing.
You were always an outdoor kid, like growing up in Southern Oregon?
I mean, I kind of had to be. I was also like the giant nerd, and they're like, get outside. I'm like, I know, I'm like... But yeah, I was like an Eagle Scout and everything, went camping all the time. I don't even know how many times I've gone camping. It's like hundreds easily. All sorts of crazy stuff too, like sleeping in the snow like quite literally, like digging snow shelters and stuff. You just dig a hole basically. It's like, oh man, I got snow in my sleeping bag. Gotta like rebuild the whole thing. When I was the art lead on 76 for the first like 6 months or so, I was just scheduling the art team and doling out the tasks. And I know some people have a big problem when it comes to like getting tasks done on time, but I think that's like, I suppose, one of my dev superpowers. Right. Is that if I have a deadline, I will hit that deadline. And I think you kind of have to have that when you're making those big open world games like that. It's not how long will the task take, it's how much time do I have.
Right.
And you have to scale the work to fit that. Because those games, you could spend forever on anything. You could always do more. It's also why I didn't crunch. Like, you're never going to run out. You can't. So we could have worked on Skyrim for 20 years and be like, we'll still add more dungeons, more clutter, whatever. It's like, it's a world. You can add as much as you want to a world. Yeah, I mean, that launch, I mean, not to beat around the bush, was like awful. Like we were like the villains of the internet, like the most hated thing. So that definitely is like pretty tough for everyone on the team to deal with. But I was happy to see that it got pushed into the direction it needed to and had the support. And I think with the Wastelanders update especially, adding the NPCs, like most people who play it are like, yeah, I actually like it, you know? And it was always nice, frankly, to hear that people will be like, this game sucks and I hate it, but that's a cool map, really cool art. I'm like, nailed it, but that's my job. We knew there were issues and stuff, but expecting that level of volume is another thing. I was one of those people who tried to argue to get NPCs and stuff, but I also wasn't like, this is the worst thing ever, you've like murdered a puppy kind of thing. Like, everyone was trying, so having people react that way is not great. But that's also part of why I'm indie now also, because I can not 100% say, but pretty confidently say, no matter what I make and how bad it is, or great, I'm unlikely to piss off the internet as much as that ever again. Like, that's pretty unlikely. At first glance, it's like open world game, solo indie, that's stupid. That's probably usually true. But it is, you know, like my 6th open world game and I really know what goes into them. And the fact that it's like a hunting game actually really keeps that scope in control. Because if you look at the number of assets you need to do for something like Fallout 4 with a dense urban environment and all these NPCs, like you're talking about orders of magnitude more stuff and systems complexity. Whereas a hunting game, it's really about having like this big open wilderness to explore. I mean, there are locations, but it's nothing like Boston. And it's hunting monsters. Like, you're not doing these elaborate quest lines, talking to NPCs and having followers. So that helps keep the scope control. So I really just need to do a big open landscape, which is done, a bunch of creatures, which is done, and then make some locations and populate out the world. I mean, there's all the systems and stuff too, but that was like the first thing that I did in my like very early prototype. Like, can I do this? Does this work? Am I gonna need a programmer? Because I was kind of worried about that. I'm probably gonna run into something like, oh, we're saving the game and I just can't do that. I'm gonna have to like hire a programmer, but I was like, man, Unreal is great. I thought it was gonna take me like 2 weeks maybe to do the save game system. It was like 2 days. I was just like, here's, save this and this and this, load it back up. I'm like, oh, well, that's way easier than I thought it was gonna be. I would say Unreal is a lot more open with how you do stuff. Like, even if I wanna do a tool in the editor itself, I can make that. Like the same system that you use for doing like the gameplay logic with like the whole blueprint system, which is like a visual scripting system, you can use that to make tools. So everything is like very open and easy to expand upon. You build one thing, but then bring it into another to inherit it. And like all of my creatures are technically based off one master creature that then gets modified for all the like the 60 different versions. Whereas we didn't have shared properties for most things at Bethesda. So we'd be like, I want to make all the weapons like 10% more damage. Like, oh God, let me just enter all these numbers and make sure I don't mess it up by hand. And spend a lot of time pulling down these builds, seeing if it worked. Oh, nope, it doesn't. Let me roll back. And like that can take a lot of time. Yeah, I did it kind of like chronologically. So over here you got like Fallout 3, Skyrim, Fallout 4, Fallout 76. Don't really have Starfield merch. And then I laid out all the games that I shipped on that bottom row. And all these like random crystals for like Game of the Year award. I enjoyed Bethesda when it was like 65 people when I started, 110 or so on Skyrim. That was a pretty good number, but once it gets above that, you end up with all these like tiers of management and approval, and had like 3 one-on-ones with producers every week. So I very much enjoy not having so many meetings. Like, it made sense when I was like art lead on 76, effectively the art director, having 20 to 25 meetings a week. That makes sense. That's literally the job. Some people are like, why do I have so many meetings? Like, dude, you're in charge. That is the job. But then on Starfield, like, I was only in charge of some stuff, like lead lighting artists and like dealing with programmers and stuff like that. But everybody had a lot of those meetings too, because there just has to be more layers of approval when you're talking about like 500 people. And before, a lot of those people had been there a long time. Like, the average was like 10 years that people had been there. It's like, we trust you, you've got it. A lot of the stuff in Skyrim and Fallout is frankly people doing what they wanted to do. And that just isn't the case when you have a bunch of people who have never worked on the games and from totally different branches of the company that have been brought into the fold. It's a different way of operating. Not to say it doesn't work, it's just not how I like to make games. Right. I suppose I got that indie spirit of like, woo, I do whatever I want. Do you need 500 people, or could you actually have half as much stuff and still be fine? like this is a lot. Like, the amount of stuff that goes into those games doesn't have to be that much. Like, I know people want their money's worth and obviously want really high production values. And people are like, oh, the cost of games have gone up over time. But on the flip side, I would argue like tools have gotten better. Like, there are a lot of things that have gotten more efficient. Like, not every game needs to be like games as a service with all these like piles and piles of systems where every game now has a crafting system in it. Like, you can like take it down a notch and like get a little bit of focus there still and have a game that I think people enjoy. So this is where I like tune all the bows and have all these different materials. I thought, should I put like a tracker in for how many arrows I've shot? It's gotta be like 20 million. I got like little deer guy here to just, can just keep shooting him. Get the little blood spraying out. There's no nav mesh here, so he can't attack me unless I like tempt him. I mean, I grew up with like a bow, and we had an archery range in the backyard, so I've used a bow quite a bit. To me, it's like an inherently fun weapon because there's a tension there. People are like, oh, why don't you do like a gun or whatever? Like a gun, you point it and you click. But the bow, you have to worry about like pulling it back and the delay there, but you can't hold it back too long because then you like start to shake. There's a lot of fun there, and there's a whole bunch of tuning that goes into it. Like, to this day, I'm like tweaking things like, how does it drop? How fast does it go? What about the different arrows? Some fly differently than others. I think the closest parallel is to like the actual hunting simulators. You're like paying attention to their tracks and the wind direction. They can smell you also. So you have to pay attention to that, but you slowly get those powers yourself too. So then you can see the scent particles of the creatures. You can like feel how warm the tracks are. So if it's like, that's a really ancient one or it was just there, it's all about like lining up that good shot and trying to approach it a little more methodically, I suppose. Having something interesting besides just the monsters. I don't want it to feel like, oh, it's this big empty world. I want it to feel epic, but always with those approachable goals that you can see. That way you're not bored and you always don't feel lost. And that actually is something I haven't touched on either, is that I don't want the mini-map and stuff. Like, the whole HUD in the game, like, there is no HUD. Like, everything exists in the world. Like, if you want to see how many arrows you have, you pull up your quiver and you look. Yeah, it's like that tension and tactile feel, and I just feel like too many games just go deep down this UI rabbit hole where it's like everything has like an icon floating above it, and all those things just like really take me out of the game, and I feel the design of the game. I think I want a map eventually, like that you can pull up in the book, but to look at. But then, did you ever play Firewatch in that mode where you turn off the marker for where you are? That feeling and like the thought that goes into it and how that feels as a player is just lost in a lot of games, and you're just like a fish with a hook in your mouth. Like, oh, I'm going this way. I will just spawn a new Sasquatch and murder him if I can, or just restart it. But they all have fur simulations, like, so
oh, wow.
Actual hair, because UE has like this whole hair system. So there's like a regular model under there. Here, let me kill them all. Handy button, you gotta have the kill them all button.
You monster.
So I had to comb Bigfoot for my job. Because you grow the hair, and then you actually, like, there's a comb tool where you're like, the hair has to flow this way, and like a little bit shorter there, giving him a little trim. That looks too nice, let's make it a little messier. Like in the initial trailers, like there's this weird deer creature that has like tons of horns, way too many, or antlers, and people know what a deer is, so it's like, that's a deer, but weird, and like that's makes more sense versus giant tree dude. You're like, what do I do? And I think it's kind of fun to have like little quirks to how each of them act and you fight. Also, just like having that spectrum of which ones people know and understand. Like I basically have a Bigfoot. Like people know what that is. He's huge and scary, and he just kind of comes marching at you and takes a ton of arrows. He knocks you off of cliffs. Super fun. But then some of them I was just like, I'm gonna go weird and have some ones that people don't know what it is. Like there's one that's like this vortex of sand slowly coming towards you, and you're like, is that even a creature? Like, what do I do? So this is my roadmap of what I've done so far and what's left on the game. So I started the game around June of 2021, and at first I made the prototype and finished it in around August. Played for like 5 minutes, hunt a monster, that's about it. By December 2021, you could play for about an hour, and you could like actually level up, creatures would respawn. It was more like a real game at that point. So after that, I moved on to the systems and finished that in April. And that's like everything I need for the game. All the different arrows, powers, it all works in an open world, you can save. It's all the stuff, frankly, I was worried about, especially because my background is in art, but that all went great. And then I just finished up the full open world map, and that has 6 different regions. It's massive, it's like 5 times the size of Skyrim. The full world is now all there. I like to assume that no one knows about my game, no one cares. It's like, I might have a little bit of a leg up because I worked on Skyrim and Fallout and all these other things, but all that really does is open up some initial doors. So I'm not gonna do that.
From the maker of Skyrim.
Yeah. Sold 1 million copies, not happening. So I think it's very, very wise to assume no one gives a shit. So I have this strategy, I suppose, of trying to get out there early and try as many things as possible, because you also don't know what's gonna stick. Like sometimes a random screenshot Saturday that I do on Twitter ends up being bigger than like some IGN article or something. Like you don't know what is gonna really resonate with people. So putting out a lot of things and seeing what sticks can be helpful to get those wish lists to continue to go up, and like that's a uphill battle. Overall, I probably spend like 20% of my time on marketing stuff, but it's very variable. Like at the start, it's a spike, but then it goes down, and then something goes viral, and it goes up again and down, and then something else. It's like overall, it's in a spot that I'm happy with. Like, I don't know, people can like check this on Steam DB. I'm like, oh, I'm just shy of like top 500 wish list. That seems like a good spot for just one person. That said, I'd rather aim like super high because you don't know how it's gonna go until you ship. I'm trying to keep it a little loose. Like I haven't set a hard deadline for next year, but I did like put a stake in the sand. I was like, this is not gonna be like an 8-year indie project. Like I am gonna ship this thing. What I have left to do at this point is basically I'm spending the rest of this year building out all of the locations in the map, because I've got the systems, I've got the world, I've got the creatures. So then I just need to put in the locations, which in a way is like eye candy, like not to diminish it, and like there's thought and level design and clutter and all these things that go in, but it's like technically I could ship the game without any of those. So at the same time, I'm also iterating on the game itself now that all of those things are in place. By the end of this year, have all the locations in, and then next year is all about shipping. Fix the bugs, localization, which consoles am I going on? Am I doing the porting? Is someone else doing the porting? The millions of marketing things that go into that and lining that all up. I vet all my ideas with my wife too, and we like talk about the narrative stuff and how it all goes together. Like she is like an MD, PhD, and all in like medical stuff, so very different worlds.
But she understands how big skulls should be.
Yes, not, I believe that one is like, I don't know, 200 feet tall or something at the top of a mountain. Not a regular one.
She wants to jump up.
Yeah, and this is the most friendly cat in the world. Shows up when I'm trying to make all my videos. Jumping up.
There's something about people talking, I think, because it always happens in interviews, and whenever I'm filming stuff in my house as well. Whenever you start, people they think you're talking to them or something, and they come in, or I don't know what it
It's
is.
just always like, here, I'm just gonna knock my monitors off.
Excellent. West Virginia up there as well.
Yeah, that's the 76 map, and I erased all the things that I shouldn't have up there about release dates.
Apologies, you'll have to write them all again when I leave.
Yeah, I took a picture. This is kind of funny. I put up all these like random things. Like I put up the bow that I have, because I'm working on a game with archery, so I should have an actual bow. Like I had one when I was growing up too, but I also got this when I was growing up, which is kind of absurd, because it's like, I thought I was remembering this wrong for when I got this, but then I checked the date on it, and 1993. I got this when I was 11 years old. Like, so that's a Oregon style for you. You get a ridiculously huge knife when you're 11 years old. I'm not really sure what you're supposed to do with it.